Okay. So normally we start these calls with kind of a short round of introductions. So name, organization, location, and maybe just a little bit about your work. We try and keep it brief in order to leave more time for discussion. So I can start. I'm Alexandra Groom, and I work with Regeneration International, and I'll be moderating the call today. I can point at people around the screen here if we want to make it easier. Adam.
My name is Adam Sachs. I'm with Biodiversity for a Livable Climate in Cambridge, Massachusetts.
And Storm.
Right.
Yeah, hi, I'm Storm Cunningham. I'm in Arlington, Virginia, and I'm the publisher of Revitalization News.
Nice. Judy?
I'm Judy Schwartz, and I'm a journalist, author, and my new book, Water in Plain Sight, Hope for a Thirsty World, has just come out.
Yay. Camilla and Jim?
Do you want to tell us who you are?
No, we'll each go, you know. Okay, I'm Jim Beckett, and we're filmmakers with Beckett Films, and we're making a film about Vandana Shiva, which has much enlarged our activity and interest in the whole picture of food and climate and the whole picture. So we're delighted
Regeneration.
to be here.
And actually, we were just, well, I went up to the Soil Not Oil conference. Oh, were you not?
You're Camilla.
Yeah, I'm
Okay.
Camilla. We were just up at the Soil Not Oil conference, and tonight there's a sort of follow-up Soil Not Oil conference in Santa Barbara. So we're going to go and show clips from the film, and there's going to be a big sort of report back from the Soil Not Oil conference that was in Richmond last month, which Vandana inspired. And of course, there were lots of regenerators there. Some really cool and interesting stuff going on.
Cool. That's awesome. I wish I could have made it to that conference.
Yeah, well, next year, Vandana will be back next year, and it'll be bigger next year, I think. This year it was a little smaller than last year, so
Cool.
next year is going to be big. Yeah.
Nice. And Diane.
So my name's Diane, and I do several different things, but most recently I interviewed Judith about her new book, and we've got a podcast. We run a site called Earth Friendly Homeowner, and you can see the podcast on there. And we've had like 200 listens in the last 2 days or something. So it's been really, really popular. So great job. I also teach workshops in San Diego based on, I don't know, permaculture, sustainable landscaping, regenerative agriculture in the urban setting. And I work for an organization called G3, the Green Gardens Group. And in 2015, we organized an urban soil conference, and Judith was one of our panelists there. So that's how we made that connection.
Awesome. We're so glad you could join, Diane. We have someone who's just called in from a 907 number. Who could that be?
Hey everybody, my name is Ryan Zinn. I am with Dr. Bronner's.
Nice. Thanks for joining, Ryan. We just went through a round of introductions. Just a heads up, the call is being recorded and it'll be posted to RI's YouTube channel. So welcome. You've got Storm Cunningham from Revitalization News on the line. You've got the Becketts from Beckett Films, Judith Schwartz, Adam Sachs from Bio for Climate, and Diane Downey from the Green Gardens Group.
All right.
So just say, and Ryan, do you want to introduce yourself? Oh, you just did.
Okay.
Okay.
So Ryan, I just want to call out and say that Dr. Bronner's is right in the same industrial unit lot as my business partner's other business. So we're neighbors.
Oh, very cool. Actually, I don't work out of the home office. I work remotely in Southern California in Santa Ana, but I do go down every kind of couple of months. So that's very cool.
Yeah, we should stay in touch.
Nice.
Absolutely.
So thank you all for joining today once again. The theme that we kind of decided on was actually inspired by something that Joanne wrote in the sign-up sheet. And I think it's something, and it's a question that we don't address enough in our communications and our outreach all of the time in our regeneration work. And it's, how can we translate lessons in regenerative agriculture to the urban setting? And I thought that was just a really interesting question to focus on. A number of themes related to this have come up on calls previously, such as regenerative lawn care, cultivating public spaces. But I thought it would be something interesting to discuss with you all today. And so opening up the floor for discussion.
I can say something.
Oh, all right.
Oh. It's not quite directed to soil necessarily, but I just have been talking to Patagonia about getting a grant for the film. And I'm going up to Heirloom Seed Expo this weekend to talk to a whole bunch of seed people. And we've got an idea to really boost community seed saving using the tool of our film when it comes out. But that is sort of in small local settings, encouraging people to save seeds and to start small seed libraries and things like that. I don't know if that comes under the banner of, community renewal, but that's something that I'm going to be working on quite a bit in the next months.
The whole intersection of urban regeneration and natural resource restoration, regenerative agriculture is one I encounter virtually daily because, my books and talks and workshops have always been focused on regeneration as an overall global trend rather than on any particular kind of asset. And one of the lessons a lot of cities are learning right now is that the only way they can get revitalization or regeneration or whatever you want to call it is by taking a more holistic approach that's focused on repurposing and renewing and reconnecting their natural and built and socioeconomic environments. So it's very much kind of an ecosystem kind of thinking that's coming to the urban environment, but not just the way they think. I mean, there are so many trends right now that are reuniting urban areas with the ecological system that they all operate within. The most obvious ones being the green infrastructure trend. You've got the local food system trend that are reconnecting urban cores with the rural regions around them. You've got, as you already mentioned, backyard wildlife gardens that are restoring native species and native species of plants, which helps restore native species of animals. And the lessons that come out of ecological restoration are affecting the way people are managing cities right now. For instance, the whole field of adaptive management is being adopted now by a number of cities such as Pittsburgh. And the concept of adaptive management came out of the ecological restoration field. So when people were trying to restore ecosystems, 20, 25 years ago, they very quickly discovered that restoring nature is the ultimate test of knowledge and understanding. Conserving nature, you can do that by slapping a fence around the place, but restoring it exposes one's ignorance very, very quickly. And so the ecological restorationists very quickly decided, well, we can't do it the way most cities do it, or saying we're going to come up with a 15-year plan and 15 years from now we'll revisit the plan. They needed to revisit the plan almost daily as their ignorance was exposed and as nature continued to surprise them. So they came up with adaptive management. And so that's very much changed the way people are thinking about how cities are run.
So that reminds me of Alan Savory's holistic management.
Mm-hmm.
There's a certain component of that where you need to revisit the plan on a fairly frequent basis, right?
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Interesting. I'm involved in Surfrider, the non-profit, that looks after the beaches. And we have a program called Ocean Friendly Gardens. And much of our work is built on that. So we have all these terms, but it's the same sort of thing. It's about capturing rainwater in place, using native plants and building healthy soil. And those three major components work together to protect the watershed, but also create a local environment that's green and covered with greenery to help cool the environment and sequester carbon and stuff like that. So I've shared the link to Green Gardens Group, and you can see the handbook that we wrote for San Diego, but we've also written one for Beverly Hills. And there's one for the County of LA as well, all very similar concepts. And those are the classes that we teach. They're based on that.
Mm-hmm. Another aspect of this is this holistic thinking movement is people are reconnecting silos. One of the things that's gotten in the way of a lot of community revitalization is the brownfields people only focus on brownfields, the heritage people only focus on historic buildings, the infrastructure people only focus on their particular part of the infrastructure, sewer, transportation, or power, or whatever. And revitalization is the kind of thing that really can only be accomplished by treating the city as the living, adaptive system that it is. And you can't deal with complexity just by treating a city like a car where you just yank out a water pump and slap in a new one. So this breaking down of silos is something that is not just affecting people's thinking, but it's bringing the nature back into the cities. Because now the infrastructure people are talking to the watershed restoration people, who are talking to the regenerative agriculture people, who are talking to the, ecological, the biodiversity restoration people. So that's another aspect of this trend where, the lines between urban and nature are blurring very, very quickly, and they never really should have been there in the first place.
So are you saying that Pittsburgh is a model for that other cities or other communities can draw on as a template? Or
I'm not sure it's quite far enough along to use it as a learning experience. Mayor Bill Peduto has publicly said that they've adopted adaptive management as the way they're going to be managing the city. But that's, I think, within the last 2 years or so. So anybody wishing to do so in their own city would probably be better just to learn adaptive management itself rather than trying to learn from Pittsburgh.
I would say that one of the other sets of barriers that we're seeing breaking down in Southern California anyway is the kind of silo between water supply and water quality. So in the past, G3 is very much focused on the water supply people. So we had, for the longest time, we had a contract with Metropolitan Water, who are the wholesale water supplier for the whole of Southern California, pretty much. But now we're seeing the water quality people come into the picture because the new MS4 permits, the permit to pollute, basically, the cities and that are part of the whole watershed are now individually responsible for pollution that ends up at the beach. So as a collective whole, I guess, they're responsible. And so we're seeing some of the interest in the funding for some of our programs coming from that aspect, that sphere, rather than the supply people, where, I have to think that their business model is very much dictated by how much water they sell. So conservation is good up to a point for them, but what we've seen in the last few years of the drought here in Southern California is that it bites into their bottom line, and at some point they kind of cut it off and say, okay, that's enough conservation, we can't afford anymore. So by moving the focus to water quality, I think that opens up more, for us anyway, some more funding channels.
Yeah, and not just focusing on water quality, but focusing on water. It's kind of implied, but when you add the word improvement of both quantity and quality, then you're getting into the regenerative model again, and away from the conservation model or the sustainability model, which in actuality, not necessarily in theory, but in actuality, most sustainability efforts are focused on doing less damage. Wasting less, doing, hurting the earth less. And we're past that. I mean, the Earth is now so damaged, after 200 or 300 years of this, that we need to be thinking in terms of how do we restore and undo the damage, not just how do we slow down the rate of new damage.
So Diane, what do the water supply people say about where this water that they need to stop conserving is going to come from?
They, here in San Diego County, the new desalination plant that opened up in Carlsbad is the White Knight. It's going to save us.
Is that solar powered?
Sorry, no, it is not. No, it is not. And
The sun doesn't put out enough energy to power one of those things.
Yeah, well, and they're also pushing now for, I think there's at least 3 more in the works up and down the coast here in Southern California.
I think they might, they're thinking about it for Ventura, where we are for sure.
I
think it's dry, it's bad.
Yeah, I saw an article, and I can dig it up and put it in the notes. And it was talking about 3. There's one that's going to be put on Camp Pendleton, which is the big marine base that's close to us here in North County. And obviously that's probably the least likely that we are to have control over because it's done by the military. But there are 2, city-based community. One in Mexico, actually, right on the border.
Nice.
So yeah, it's crazy thinking, but
What kind of comes to mind is something actually that Judy, you mentioned in your most recent book, Water in Plain Sight, is how Tucson could have the capacity, I know we're talking about California, but Tucson could have the capacity to meet all of its citizens' water needs just by harvesting its annual rainwater. I wonder if cities like San Diego are considering options like that. I've no idea what your annual rainfall is, but instead of desalination?
Our average rainfall is about 10 inches a year down here in San Diego. And I could quite believe that we could support ourselves. I don't know the math on that, though.
So we had at our conference last fall, Restoring Water Cycles to Reverse Global Warming, we had an example from Nevada where they also get 10 inches of rain a year. And this rancher and fisheries biologist over a period of 20 years turned a part of the desert into this blue-green, biodiverse, varied paradise. And it needn't necessarily take 20 years. They were just kind of doing it on their own. After 10 years of restorative grazing, the beavers just showed up and then took everything up a whole other notch. So make some room for beavers in San Diego. You never could tell what would happen.
Well, Diane brings up a really important point, which is that a lot of people that people aren't making money by when you're conserving if they are selling that resource. And clearly a desalination plant, someone is making money there. And rainwater harvesting, who makes money on it? I mean, this kind of bumps up against some, ongoing challenges. But in terms of San Diego, I do remember, Diane, actually during the Urban Soil Summit that Andrew Lipkiss of Tree People talked about how in the lowest rainfall year in Los Angeles, how many thousands of gallons of water per person was wasted. So here there is this tremendous opportunity, but we don't hear about it. And there are a lot of institutions that are then set up to derive profits from scarcity. Anyway, that's a challenge. But
yeah, I do know of one outfit that tried to make money off of rainwater. Judith. Oh, by the way, Judith, I should apologize that I haven't reviewed your book in Revitalization News yet. Too much travel. It's sitting right there. Thank you very much for it. It's sitting right there on my dining room table, waiting for me to catch up, and I will dive into it soon. But in my 2008 book, the McGraw-Hill book, Rewealth, I did a case study on Cochabamba, Bolivia. Anybody know that story?
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Yeah, it's rather infamous, where the U.S. company Bechtel out of San Francisco did what was supposedly a public-private partnership, which is really just an outright privatization of the water system in Cochabamba. And they actually got to the point where they were going to charge people for collecting rainwater in their own backyards. They said, we own it all, no matter where it comes from. So you got to be a little careful about trying to monetize some things. They ended up getting thrown out of Bolivia, by the way.
Yeah, they revolted, so.
Yeah. So, and anyway, one thing I should mention regarding water, a few weeks ago, I did a talk up in Frederick, Maryland for Preservation Maryland. And the talk is specifically for historic restorationists, preservationists, but they asked me to help them break out of their historic preservation silo. And so I started off the talk with an example of some wonderful silo busting that took place in India. By the way, if you want to see this, the actual illustrations that go with it, it's right at the beginning of the talk. If you go to stormcunningham.com, my public speaking site, and go to the very bottom, there's a list of articles and videos, and the very first one on there is a recording of this talk. It's on YouTube. So anyway, the silo busting example I gave was that, for decades now, the water people have been bemoaning all of the billions of gallons that are lost every year to evaporation from canals, especially, like in LA, getting water from the Colorado River, or all these irrigation canals for farms, they're just open concrete ditches. They lose tremendous amounts of the water to evaporation. And they've never been able to figure out how do we really stop that effectively. On the other, so they're in their water silo. And then you've got the renewable energy people in their silo who are saying, to really scale up these solar arrays, we need vast amounts of acreage. And the trouble is that, a huge solar array is either going to cover up arable land or it's going to cover up wildlife habitat, because even a desert is wildlife habitat for some kinds of wildlife. So you've got these two people with this seemingly intractable problems in their silos. In Gujarat, India, these silos came together and they are now building solar arrays over the water canals, all these ditches, which cuts way down on the evaporation. It gives the solar people virtually unlimited real estate with right-of-way already in place. It's just an absolute brilliant example of busting silos.
Yeah, Storm, actually, I recently watched a talk of yours about busting silos, and in the notes, I in the notes for today's call, I'd taken a screenshot, and so I shared it here, the 8 silos of restorative development. I think it's so interesting. And so I wonder if anyone here kind of knows why silos were created in the first place, and why do you think that we're seeing them disappear or, break?
Well, if you watch the talk all the way through, I actually ended it up by saying the opposite. I was saying that maybe since all these silos tend to house a tremendous amount of resources and expertise, maybe we don't need to bust them. What we need to do is better connect them.
Yeah, maybe the terminology I was using is wrong, but yes, so not breaking down silos, but connecting people in different silos. I see.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. I'll just, okay. I just do find it really encouraging and interesting that you're saying that these silos are starting to connect. I don't see that in terms of storytelling right now. And, I'm always looking at the media and how things are presented. And I'm waiting for that to connect more. It's an ongoing point of frustration that I think we lose opportunities, and we lose time, and we waste a lot of, frenetic energy by maintaining those silos. And I think there are a lot of people do benefit from having those silos there, because everyone gets a little fiefdom, and certainly that's true journalism as well.
Yeah,
I would
it
just
to be a clear message. It's like the 350.org and the regenerative ag thing. It's hard to message out, I guess, if you've got a complicated message or a connected message.
from another perspective, I would say just that we are biologically tribal creatures, and we, as civilizations grow, we maintain our tribal responses, and so we naturally congregate into small groups, and that's a real challenge in a global civilization. But I think that's pretty much where it comes from.
Yeah, but it's not just humans. I mean, ants live in ant silos, bees live in bee silos. But they realize they need to be connected to the flower silos and all the other.
That's kind of an anthropocentric overlay there, but yeah, I see what you're saying, and of course I agree.
No, I thought that Gujarat story, when you were talking about how do we tell a story, I thought that was an excellent example that combined renewable energy, water, and just an excellent example of how you bring two silos together. I don't know if, Storm, has somebody written that as a story? Because that would seem to me a very good journalistic piece.
Oh, I'm sure somebody has, since I discovered this. Even our web development team is actually in Gujarat, so I first heard about it from there. But I did encounter it somewhere on the web, which is where I got the photograph that I used in the PowerPoint. But you'd have to Google it. Just Google solar water canals Gujarat, because I know. I read something in English, in an English language publication about it, but I couldn't tell you offhand where it was. But I think it's a story that really needs to be told and gotten out to a larger audience. Because I think it was a very, very narrow publication that I saw it in. So you're right. It's a story that has lessons on a lot of different levels.
Well, and then you hope that idea gains currency and you create a new silo for interconnections.
Yeah, right.
I would suggest that we're straining the metaphor with the word silo.
Do you think?
We're not really big round towers with little doors at the bottom where the grain falls out. We're much more flexible and fluid boundary, although people can get very rigid about it, as we see in reductionist science. But these separations can change. They can change very quickly, and that's our hope, is that we start the communications and the understandings happening in the zeitgeist. And
I'm sure there's many stories like that we just don't know about it. I mean, there is probably stuff going on, not only in Gujarat. I mean, maybe it's one responsibility is to start gathering those stories and disseminating them.
Oh, we've got them. There are thousands of them. You can go to the Bio for Climate conference pages. We've had 6 conferences so far. It's full of stories, from urban agriculture and farming to the Amazon to Africa. I mean, one of the things that I've learned over the past 3 years that we've had biodiversity for a livable climate is that we have no shortage of stories. We have no shortage of examples. We have no shortage of experience and on how to restore ecosystems. It's true, you have to have some idea of what you're doing, but it's not rocket science. And we have examples and models and step-by-step instructions and people from all over the world who will come visit you and say, here's how you do it. And it works over and over again, over and over and over again. I mean, the part of the problem is that we don't understand that this entire planet is a result of biology. We would just be another you know, Mars or Venus or whatever if it weren't for biology. Biology made Earth happen. And biology changed the mineralogy, and it changed the atmospheric, it changed everything. And so we have the opportunity to revive that. And one of the things that you hear from restoration ecologists over and over again is how fast it happens once you put the keystone pieces in place. It's like, you know, overnight. In Nevada, okay, that's 10 to 20 years because there's not that much rainfall, but I'm sure that there are ways of accelerating that. So it's a matter of changing our worldview.
Yeah. So what do you need from the rest of us then to scale up what you're doing, or that knowledge that you have?
Well, it's not my knowledge. I mean, I'm just an armchair restoration ecologist. I live in the city, and I'm a city kid, and I wish I wanted to farm, but I don't.
So, how can we share your stories, Adam? How can we help?
They're on our website. They're all the speakers' presentations, including some of Judy's, are up on our website, and we've had 55,000 views, which is wouldn't be great if you were Kim Kardashian, but if you're us, then yeah. And this fall, as I said, we're doing oceans. Maybe I didn't say we're doing an oceans conference, because we have an idea of what terrestrial restoration looks like, and we've run into hundreds of people who are doing it, and there are thousands more out there. And if you need help finding them, I'll be happy to, you know, just send me an email, and I'll be happy to do what I can. The pieces are all in place. The issues are the water companies that need to make money, and so they've never considered just how much profit they're going to make off of a dead planet. And maybe if they start considering that, they'll shift the momentum of capital and ownership. But I mean, that's something that always happens in civilizations. Human beings are small group creatures. We don't scale up well. We can scale up, but we make a mess when we do, which is why every civilization has eventually collapsed.
But so, Adam, how a lot of the learnings that you're speaking about, so it's why you're shifting to oceans, so they're related to land restoration. And so are there any kind of case studies that you come across that apply to urban restoration, and what learnings can we take from the land ones to apply to urban settings? Because, you know, the majority of our population lives in these urban settings. Yeah. That's really what we should also be focusing on simultaneously.
Well, it's kind of like the depaving parties that happen in Somerville, Massachusetts, right next to Cambridge, where people are going in. The town, the city of Somerville provides this big dumpster, and people have what used to be a barn raising party in New England. So a whole bunch of friends and neighbors get together with their pickaxes and shovels and sledgehammers, and the contractor kind of supervises, and they have a party on a Saturday, and musicians come by, and somebody gets the pizzas, and they spend the day tearing up the asphalt that's covering their backyard and their driveway. And they cart it all away. And you can go to our homepage on our website and scroll down to the bottom, and there's examples of this. This one happened about 3 or 4 years ago, and the next year, the whole place is full of flowers and plants, and all of that is carbon that used to be in the atmosphere. And granted that most of it cycles, but as it grows deeper, it stores. And that's bio, number 4, climate.org. And I mean, that's fundamentally what cities have to do, or one of the central things that cities have to do, is recreate permeable surfaces so that water just lands and stays in place, doesn't run off, doesn't evaporate. Would completely change the stormwater issues. It would change the water supply issues. It would change the biodiversity issues. And cities have to become uncities. Some urban planner or planners, and I'm sure people have done this, have to figure out how to keep a population in a viable situation, but tear up all the concrete surfaces. And the flip side of that, and this is how everything is connected, right now we're tearing up the oceans in search of sand. We're trawling the bottom and killing the creatures, and not to mention beaches all over the world. It's a huge business because people need the sand to make concrete. So if we turn our cities into living soil operations, we don't need the concrete. And
we should be putting our concrete out with our recycling.
Sure. I mean, we've gone down lots of paths that seemed like a good idea at the time, and they turned out to be a really bad idea. And it eventually catches up. And we're the lucky generation, I guess the older half of the lucky generation, except for you, Alex, that gets to see the culmination of the mess and gets to deal with it. And before I go, I hope I can help.
Yeah, that's
Hey everybody, this is Ryan. I'm curious if anybody's come across any sort of municipal ordinance or resolution that sort of can facilitate some of these ideas, whether it's providing public lands for urban gardens or some of these other things that you've been mentioning. I feel like that's a really sort of tangible way that people can get involved. So I'm just curious if anybody has any examples or resources there.
There are towns all over. I mean, in my area, Ryan, in eastern Massachusetts, towns all over the place where they're revisiting their ordinances about backyard chickens and goats. And I used to help herd a goat, herd a herd of goats in suburban Lexington, Massachusetts. And people would say, "Oh, what kind of dog is that?" But it was great to take them down the bike path and around town. And the person who started the herd, it was really tough for her. And she went before the board, and they gave her permission for 2 goats. And the neighbors, she was very careful about neighbors not complaining. And then she got permission to have 5 goats. Plus the baby goats don't count. So she had 15 goats. And goats do what goats do. But that's one way. Another way is you go before the town and you just propose an audience, and depending upon how your municipality is governed, anybody or anybody's representative can propose an ordinance. I mean, there are thousands of them all over the country. And then there's the Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund, which started in Pennsylvania and now has offices in Spokane, which works with communities on ordinances that defy so-called higher level law, state and federal, based on individual people's constitutional rights. And you can go see their work at CELDF, it's Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund, that's CELDF.org. And that's in situations where you're getting corporate resistance to doing that sort of thing. And that shouldn't be that much of a problem in a lot of places, although, Diane, I mean, if you had a group of citizens who came out and said, "We want beavers, not desalinization plants," and the corporate water department came in and said, "You can't do that," well, then you could move to, I don't know, whatever your method is in San Diego, your ballot question or legal challenge or whatever. But there are all kinds of precedents for this, Ryan. I think we're in pretty good shape to get this going. I mean, there's a big urban farming movement that's caught on in the past few years in Boston, which is right across the river from Cambridge.
Across Canada as well.
I'm sure. Oh, absolutely. And if you go to, are people familiar with the Victory Gardens initiative in Milwaukee? Great movement. They put in 500 urban gardens a year for free if you're poor, for minimal charge if you can afford it. And it's happening all over the place. When we did our urban gardening and farming to reverse global warming conference, this was in May of 2015. which was right next to somebody else mentioned at a conference around then. We were just astonished at how much people have been working on urban gardens, and there's lots of help out there. People are anxious to share what they've learned.
You made a good point about working with legislators, and I think one challenge that I think there's some good stuff happening is in terms of educating policymakers, because a lot of our policymakers are drafting legislation from, like, within four walls, and really they're trained in urban settings, and they don't really have much connection with the land. And I'll just mention this, that I have the opportunity to do this because in about 10 days I will be testifying in Congress it's an informal congressional hearing on restorative grazing practices as can be relevant to public lands. And this hearing is being set up by a Wyoming congresswoman. But, in talking to her, it's just really interesting because she feels the need to inform her peers in Congress about land practices. And so that's one element, but those lessons can be built also around what's possible in urban settings and all of that. But it's really exciting to be able to do this because people who are drafting policies often don't know that there are regenerative practices.
Unless Alec tells them what to do.
Well, suppose they gave Alec and nobody listened.
This is
can only hope.
A way before. Didn't San Diego have a gray water project? That's something that hasn't been mentioned, the idea of taking gray water and converting it to potable water.
The toilet to tap.
That's one way to put it.
That's how it's publicized here by the people who would fight against it. Yeah, they do, and I think they're still pushing ahead in the city of San Diego to do that. They have a nicer term for it, which is more marketable. Yeah, so they do. They definitely are looking at that as an option too. I think up in Orange County, they're doing more of that. And where I'm from, that is how we get our water. So it's like, you mean you're just throwing this away? It doesn't make sense.
Oh, it's in San Diego, I think. But
No.
Yeah, I'm based in San Diego, but I'm British, and so where I grew up, all our wastewater would go to one spot and be retreated, and then it would come back in through our taps. So
it raises an interesting entropy issue. So there's people you mentioned that are in the toilet to tap kind of anti-gray water movement, and it's just like we can't ignore human waste and we can't contaminate our water systems at the same time. So you're facing these kind of divergent groups, but it's all kind of one of the same, and we need to be dealing with these issues.
Well, the other part of it is that we should never be using potable water to transport so-called waste, and waste, there is no such thing as waste in nature, and
exactly.
All belongs in place. There's one of the speakers at our conference is a remarkable guy his name is Brian von Hertzen. I don't know if you've heard of him, but and he is working on a project in collaboration with the Gates Foundation of all people to bring processing of sewage. He has developing technology to turn it into biochar. And it's a local technology. So you can take the non-nitrogenous human waste and put it back in the ground in a stable form that holds carbon for centuries or longer. And certainly that's something that we could consider here in one form or another. It doesn't have to go to biochar. It could be composted. I mean, there are all kinds of ways of doing it. Composting toilets have been around for 50 years in their modern incarnation. And why aren't we doing it?
Who's profiting? Not sure.
Well, you know, that's the whole thing about municipal function, what it used to be. And when Dennis Kucinich, as the boy mayor of Cleveland, fought for the public electrical utility, and half won, half the city, I don't know if it still is, but as of 10 years ago, it was still being run by the municipal utility at a fraction of the cost that the for-profit utility was supplying the other half of the city. And that's traditionally been a municipal and a public governmental function, and we've sold a lot of it off for dubious reasons.
This is maybe a stupid question because it's not anything I know much about it, but is human waste that natural? I mean, if you think of all the medications and all the stuff that we're putting into our bodies, then putting it back to composting it, is that an issue at all?
Yes.
People who know those things?
It's an issue.
And it ends up in our water stream anyway.
Right.
So what happens in Vegas comes down to San Diego.
Right.
There's an organization called the Rich Earth Institute, which is up here in Vermont in Brattleboro, and that is about I'll post the link, closing the nutrient cycle, and they're using urine and bringing them to farms. They're doing a lot of research about that, and that has been a challenge, but I think that they've worked out ways to deal with it. I'll post this and we'll see what they are.
Get all the ADD meds and the antidepressants out of the pee.
Yeah, you know, interestingly enough, I heard a story of you know, a childcare worker in Montreal, and she said that they're seeing a huge increase in incidences of child depressions, and they're tracing it back to antidepressants in traces in the water, in municipal water.
Right, because they can be paradoxical in children.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
50 years ago, scientist named John Todd, whom you may have heard of, developed a device called a living machine. And he was applying this process to all kinds of highly toxic waste, in which the polluted material would go into one of the tanks of the living machine, and the machine could have 4 or 10 or 15 tanks, and each tank would have a variety of life forms in it. So you might start out with all kinds of local area microbes and some aquatic plants, and it goes downhill to the very end where there are fish in the final tank, and the fish are kind of like the canaries in the mine shaft, and the fish are living and the water is pure, and the only thing that happened between point A and point Z is there are all these various forms of life. And Jim Laurie, who's our staff scientist, worked with John Todd for a while, and early on he said to John, well, how do I know which organisms to put in? And John said, oh, I don't know. You just throw them all in and they'll work it out. And they do. And microbes, of course, evolve very quickly. And if there's energy in a compound, they'll figure out how to extract that energy and break it down to its constituent elements. So all of those meds will become carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, a mineral or two, or whatever they were before they got put into these very contorted shapes. So I'm not saying that it's easy or quick to do this, but if you step into the context of biology as a whole, you see how all of these things start to interconnect and work themselves out. So the solutions are there. It might not be quick in some instances, but they're there. It's the mindset. That's the problem.
I think that's the perfect spot to kind of wrap up. Very, very interesting point, Adam. I think it would be great to open up the last 5 minutes for kind of any announcements, just to give people the opportunity to say if there's any upcoming events they're going to or hosting, and opportunities to kind of connect in person or further ways to get involved. I don't know if that's of interest to people. I'd also love suggestions for future themes for calls. So if you have any thoughts in that regard too. Yeah. Adam, your conference, and what are the dates?
The dates are November 18th through 20th. I'm putting the URL into the chat box, and the conference is called Restoring Oceans to Reverse Global Warming. No, Restoring Oceans, Restoring Climate. Sorry. Okay. And we realize that it's a very
Hello?
Monsanto. And just reading the press, Monsanto has been fined $80 million for fiddling around with SEC regulations. That's the good news. The bad news is they're back in Vietnam, and nobody will believe the connection with Agent Orange in this new company, Monsanto. They claim that, oh, that was a company that just had the same name. It has nothing to do with us. We're an agricultural company.
Agent Orange was an agricultural product in a sense.
It's a herbicide, and they're producing herbicides, sure. Yeah.
All right, well, I kind of dropped off there for a second, so I'm not sure where we're at, but
you didn't miss anything. I was filling airtime.
Are you going to COP22, Alex? Or
I will be there, Camilla. So we'll be at COP22. Yes. Are you guys planning on going?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. Well, if there's any kind of messages or materials we can deliver on your behalf.
When is it, in December?
November.
November, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, thanks everyone. Feel free to add any kind of follow-up notes in the notes file that I circulated. And the next chat will be in 2 weeks. So I think that's September 15th. No, September 15th. Hope you can make it, and feel free to invite friends and colleagues.
I've learned a lot.
Yeah, that was
Thank you
interesting.
so much for bringing all this talent together.
Yeah,
I've been a listener. So.
We always do. We're
learning a lot. We're learning a lot. So I hope asking questions are not too obvious, but
no, we love the questions, Camilla. I think that's such an important part of this space, is the opportunity to exchange knowledge and ideas, and that's why I do these calls, because we love that portion of it.
And Adam, I'm going to be adding your Restoring Oceans conference to the upcoming events page of Revitalization News.
Great, thank you.
Be in there by tomorrow.
Thank you, Storm, and I love your website and what you're doing with it.
Oh,
Storm,
thank you.
You do a really great job. It's amazing.
So our next meeting will be the day after Judy testifies.
Yes.
Or 2 days after Judy testifies in Congress, right?
And any ideas for the theme? Maybe definitely.
How about Judy goes to Washington?
Yay. Okay. Well, send me any thoughts you might have, and thanks all for your time today and for joining. And
and I'll be at the Climate Leadership Summit, so I'm sure I'll have all kinds of interesting stories to tell. Most of the people there are going to be emissionaries. So
that's great.
And Judy, if you've got any time while you're down here in DC, let me know, because I've got a beer with your name on it.
Okay, sounds great. I will check in with you.
Okay, thanks everyone.
I'll be down for the week too, Storm, so maybe we'll connect.
I do have one with no name on it, so I could put yours on that one.
Oh, I prefer to drink my beer anonymously because I don't drink.
Okay, that's why there's no name on it.
Okay, fantastic.
All right.